administered by the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, with aggregate scores reported to the Department of Education, and includes a provision requiring the State Board of Education adopt and promulgate rules and regulations to carry out the new changes to the law. I'm also introducing an amendment to add Columbus Day as a day that continues to be recognized. Today I'm perplexed as to why and where some concerns have been raised with my introducing LB 1069. The claims are that this bill may be harmful are truly baffling to me. Do people think it's too much work for our school boards, our educators, or even the Department of Education? Please do not tell that to the members and the families of our military when they have sacrificed so much, giving their all for generations, and do so to this very day in the name of Americanism. Leaders in education can and should be the front line in advocating for the causes of freedom, liberty, patriotism, duty, and justice, while condemning forms of government that restrict individual freedoms and governments that wish us harm as a free nation, and supporting what generations of Americans have held dear. Our U.S. Constitution is 229 years strong. On September 17, 1787, our founding fathers signed the Constitution at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, forging a new government for the United States, and today remains the envy of many who have waited and wait now in line to immigrate here. I firmly believe that America is the greatest nation in the world, and I firmly believe that we are exceptional. And I firmly believe that the idea of American exceptionalism is being slowly and surely diluted and corrupted in many of today's schools. Some may say that America has faults. Indeed, we are a work in progress due to human nature, not due to the amazing and faultless foundation upon which America is built on. Fellow colleagues and Americans, we stand on the shoulders of such great men and such great women who should never be forgotten in the freest society on the planet. We are the only country in the world to assert that everyone, everywhere, is created in the image of God and therefore endowed with unalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the only country in the world that grants power to the government rather than government constraining the power of its people. We have a high bar to set for those who want to become American citizens. The administration of the civics portion of the naturalization examination ensures that we are holding our natural-born American citizens to at least the same standard of citizenship that we hold those who immigrate to our country. The reporting of the scores informs us just how far we have to go to do so. I am going to have the page pass out a copy of this exam. It's not a cumbersome exam, and it should not be a cumbersome exam. Sincerely, I never envisioned myself running for this elected office, but the reason I became a senator is to perhaps in some very small way pay my way forward for this great country, and to perhaps leave this world a better place than I found it, than my parents found it. Last week, when one senator said terrible things about our flag and country, I spoke up about my family origins and the horrors that my parents faced to struggle to come to America from the Ukraine. The Ukraine is a country that was not free then and still struggles and fights for freedom today. The people of the Ukraine fight for the ability to enjoy prosperity and privileges many here in America take for granted. Perhaps we are a country that are many generations away from not understanding the price of freedom, and that freedom was fought for and paid on the backs of our patriots, our widows, and our orphans. We do not fight to make war, but we fight to keep peace and our freedom. Let's not keep this a secret from our children, from our youth, from our students who are learning to make a life and someday make a living. It is the responsibility of citizens in a free society to do what it takes to maintain that freedom. Crucial in that struggle, because it is a struggle, it is still a struggle to instill a love of country as dearly as those who founded it. It is every American's responsibility to develop a sense of pride and self-sacrifice in our children, as evident as those who laid down their lives for our country, and to maintain a culture of justice, civility, and competence that stewarded our great nation for over 200 years. This bill is needed now more than ever. America faces a crisis of identity in a postmodern world, and it is only through discipline, determination, and courage that we can slow the degradation of the American spirit, the degradation of the American spirit. It is important that we put aside rhetoric and move towards a sound dialogue. The significance of the Committee on Americanism is that it ensures this dialogue will take place and that our youth will be properly prepared to sustain and improve the American way of life. The Committee on Americanism is about restoring the conditions that drove my parents and so many, many others from many other lands through every kind of strife, imaginable and unimaginable, every kind of adversity, to come to America and to live out the American dream. Americans have been given everything they need to succeed. Lessons learned are written on the pages of American history. It seems though our knowledge of them is increasingly fading. Our youth must understand the trials and tribulations that America has preserved through and the human conditions that allowed great Americans to do so. We must acknowledge that to be an American is a way of life that should never be taken for granted. Built upon pillars of truth, knowledge, self-control, perseverance, and virtue flows the American spirit of gratitude, generosity, and compassion. A commitment to Americanism is not the return of good old days, nor is it an antiquated idea or harmful in any way. A commitment to Americanism is an investment in our future, our youth, and the freedom that is the American way of life. Thank you for your time and consideration this afternoon, and I do welcome any questions that you may have.
Questions from the committee? Senator Kowalski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for bringing this forward. I wanted to ask a very direct question. How do you know this isn't being done in our schools?
We have a testifier coming forward. They came here before from school, and they had done an informal survey. They found many haven't. If you turn on some late-night TV shows, a very typical comedy piece is where you stop people on Main Street and you ask them current events, current individuals in all forms of government, and several individuals that brought me this bill have expressed similar concerns. So it's from the grassroots that I am hearing that this is not being done. And it was acknowledged by a conversation I had with the lobbyist from the Nebraska Association of School Boards that it was at one point not being enforced very much, or people weren't even aware it existed, and I do believe they have a commitment to make sure that it is heard forward, but people have said it hasn't been done.
Within the entire K-12 curriculum of any particular district of the 244 districts, we have in our state, you think it's not being done overall?
I believe what I have heard was through reviewing 1,700 school boards that perhaps some of them were not doing it. I do not have a number of exactly how many, but regardless of that number, we should be sure that everyone is doing it. It is critical and important in our country, especially when Homeland Security is at threat because of inspired terrorism that we are seeing. And Nebraska is the heart of the country. And in Nebraska, I believe this is a very achievable and very sustainable and not asking too much to understand American history and the commitment that our country has for Americanism.
Tell us about the reporting out that you'd like to see done as far as the committee and the meetings of those committees within that bill, please.
Well, within the bill, we believe that at least 3 meetings should be held, that one should have the ability to have public testimony, and that minutes should be kept at the meeting. That
Who would hold that meeting, please?
the school boards, and it's already in statute. If you would see the statute, we're just asking that we have accountability, transparency, that minutes are kept, and that they be submitted to the Department of Education. Also, the test results, the same test that new immigrants take, that those scores be kept with the Department of Education and have a issue or be issued a report.
So the compilation of data on student scores would only be done in one way? There wouldn't be a combination of ways that could be done?
I believe that it could be, we did not write that into statute specifically, but I believe the Department of Education is very capable, as are our school boards are capable, and our educators, to find a method to move this forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Senator Erdman?
Thank you, Chairman Groney. Senator Brosh, thank you for bringing this bill. I was reading through your statement of intent, and on the bottom of it, it talked about whoever violates this law is guilty of a Class 3 misdemeanor. And then I look in the bill, and there's a line stricken through that provision. Can you tell me why that's been removed?
We did remove the, I believe the statement of intent was done this morning. It should have been removed. And the reason it is it's unconstitutional to have any type of punishment for this.
Okay, that was the reason. Okay, thank you.
Senator Walls, I think you were first, weren't you?
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for bringing this bill. I just had a quick question. I was reading the bill this morning, and one of the things that I found was that you added on the first page, 27, 28, 29, the youth of our state become competent, responsible, patriotic, and civil American citizens. And then crossed out was love of liberty, justice, democracy, and America will be instilled in the hearts and minds. So I'm just wondering why those things were crossed out and the others were added, just because I would think that the things that were crossed out are very important as well. So.
And we could add them back in, but we worked with several individuals, education groups, and thought that the way it is written would best fit everyone's needs, because that is a part of the curriculum that should be, I guess, a product that would result through learning American history and learning civics and the exams. I don't have a bill in front of me to see exactly what you're...
It's on the first page. Page 1. Oh, sorry, page 2, yeah.
What?
At the bottom.
Yeah, and looking at it now, it could remain in there. But when we work with individuals and conversations and meetings with different, with the school State Board. Those were things that we agreed to take out. This bill was not an easy bill to bring forward. We had a lot of input from different individuals. Some push back, some push forward, and it's good dialogue. You know, and I would welcome amendments to add it back in. And they can email you when. No, it's a good comment. Appreciate the suggestion.
Senator Vanden Brooks.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing this for discussion, Senator Brosh. I guess I have some concerns that I had when Senator Chris brought this before. Some of the concerns include just the test itself. I have concerns about the fact that, there's one woman mentioned in the whole bill that's ever had anything to do with anything in the United States, our history. There's African Americans are spoken about generally. They say what group was taken to America and sold as slaves. Africans or people from Africa is the answer. Nothing to teach about the history and what's really happened. There is a question on the Emancipation Proclamation, but it doesn't talk about Martin Luther King, Martin Luther King didn't have to do with the Emancipation Proclamation, but I don't see a question in here regarding him and his service through his advocacy of civil rights. Susan B. Anthony's the only woman that's mentioned in here. Of course, there are many others. The other thing that I think is really shocking is that of the Native American tribes in the United States, the 4 that are in Nebraska are not listed here. They are not among the correct choices. So I think that is pretty shocking. So just as a reminder for the record, Oto, Omaha, Pawnee, and Ponca, I checked to make sure are not among those listed among the correct answers. So that's sort of not good. So,
And I believe that to change that would be going through the Department of Naturalization and Immigration and not legislatively here. That is the
I
citizenship.
understand that, but isn't this an example of what happened?
And the classroom is not limited to teaching that curriculum.
Okay.
But that is an example of the tests that immigrants are required to take, and that's
But if you bring it forward to this hearing, isn't that an indication that you expect it to be similar to this test?
It would need to be similar to that, because
Okay.
that's the same test, but the instructors can have other tests that do include more local Nebraska and new, I guess, literature and discoveries of our great American history and women and others who contributed to the nation's success. But that can be done in the classroom as well. But the
Okay.
test itself was written federally, and I imagine we could do a
I get it.
resolution to, of
Yeah,
some
I'm happy
sort.
to do that, but I guess my concern is if you bring this and it becomes part of the record, then we've all heard of teaching to the test. So that is my concern, that if we pass this, we will be teaching to this test, and it's nowhere nearly broad enough. The fact that the 4 tribes in Nebraska aren't even listed, to me, is highly suspect on this. And I understand that's what somebody has decided at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration to be the appropriate thing to ask, but it's so limited in what it asks. And, I think that questions regarding why was World War II fought, to fight against fascism and to make sure that our democracies stay strong. Nothing like that is really in here. So those are the kinds of things that concern me when we specifically bring tests forward. I understand that because I do believe that we have people who have fought valiantly for for our rights and for our Constitution. I'm a big proponent of the Constitution and think we need to be protecting it more carefully. So I think all of that is really important. I appreciate you bringing this for discussion. My concern is with this specific test, and I told Senator Chris that when he brought it before too. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Anybody else? As to the striking of the love of liberty, justice, democracy will be instilled. I believe that was struck, is what I understood, because our state constitution said we have to provide free instruction. When you start putting shells and wells, that infers that we have an outcome, and we can't do that in statutes. I think that's why it was removed.
All right, I
And,
believe, yes.
As far as the Americanism Committee, that's been in statute since the 1950s. Every school district has to have an
1949,
Americanism
yes.
Committee, so that's nothing new.
No.
You're just putting in statute that they need to meet.
They need
Is
to
that not
meet.
right?
They need to have minutes and
Sure.
and also public.
I've had school board members tell me they didn't even know what that meant until this issue came up. They were told that they were on the Americanism Committee and never met. But in the minutes of the meeting, they had Americanism.
And I've heard
Is
that too.
you've heard
That is
that too?
correct, and I have heard that, and I've heard that from constituents and other non-constituents, private citizens.
And when you, I'm looking at the language here, when you say, when the language of the legislation says fallacies and the dangers and fallacies of forms of government that restrict individual freedoms or possess anti-democratic ideals such as, but not limited to, Nazism and communism, that pretty much covers the fascist regime, doesn't it?
It does.
Or a regime or a religious-based government that restricts women's rights.
I would agree that, absolutely,
All right, so,
that was the intent.
and you added Martin Luther King, and you added American Indian Day.
Yeah, American Indians.
And a lot of this was not taken from Senator Christ's bill, so a lot of it coincides with Senator Chris when he worked with the work group
Yes.
from social studies.
We attempted to try to collaborate the three bills together. We met with private citizens. We met with education groups that had input in this. And this was, there were a lot of thoughts there, but we believe that this would be a good structure to host all the thoughts in one place and not constrain schools from doing more if they choose to.
And the Americanism test, the way I read this, not the Americanism test, naturalization test, is not a standard. It will not be included in a grade unless the teacher wants to incorporate it into their curriculum and uses it as a quiz in the 8th grade and 11th grade and wants to use it as part of the total grade, but it is not mandated that the grade is reported to the parents, correct? And the
Exactly.
aggregate to the Department of Education.
Yes.
It is not a requirement for a graduation, is it?
No, it is not. There is not a penalty. There is not, it's something, a standard that we would like to see between grades 8 and graduation, that this be done and it would enrich and...
It does not have to be in the student's record.
No.
It's given to the parents, given
Yes.
to the student, given as an aggregate to the Department of Education, so citizens in a school district can find out how their kids are doing.
Correct. Yes.
Pretty simple.
It's very simple. It's,
All right, thank you.
and most of all, that these meetings are held on a regular, at least 3 times, be recorded, and enable the public to testify.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Senator Pepke?
How often do most school districts get new textbooks and things like that? Because it seems to me like some of this would require a review of textbooks.
with the internet and online, there's a lot of online books, there's a lot of resources, there's supplemental materials. I believe that schools may vary. You know, that has not been an objection that I've heard to this, but as far as, because I work with an educational software company or two, Follett, Pearson, I know that there's a lot of curriculum available electronically as well as on paper. And today we have a lot of resources available.
For free?
Some for free, some they're already subscribing to items as far as, and maybe we'll have testimony behind us that from an educator that.
I mean, I guess having been on the school board for 12 years and having sat on the Curriculum and Americanism Committee, I guess I question a little bit some of your premises that the committees aren't meeting. I mean, there may be some that aren't, but I think that most committees are meeting. I think that they're trying to put together curriculum that kind of fits together throughout the school system. I know in Crete that, you know, when we bought social studies curriculum, we had specific grade levels that did specific things, you know, that studied specific things, and you try to get curriculum that matches so that you have some continuity. And so, you know, I also will say that over the last, I don't know, probably everybody else has gotten these too, but over the last month, I've probably answered 50 emails from students in not only my district, but other places in the state where people are asking questions about the political process, about the process, you know, what I think about, you know, different things related to politics and government. So I guess I wonder whether we're really not teaching these things or whether, you know, whether this is, yeah, I certainly don't object to teaching these things. I'm just not sure where we teach them and how we assess. So,
Thank you. And we will have a student coming forward to testify about this bill as well and sharing their thoughts. And it was acknowledged to me by the Association of School Boards that, you know, they have a 1,700 school district school boards, 1,700 across the state, members, and that those members, apparently, that some may not be holding it, some are, some aren't, but they want to do a better job moving forward and ensuring these meetings are held. And I commend the Crete schools, did you say?
yeah.
And your role for in this, but many are saying it's not being done.
Okay, thank you.
One last question from me, I hope. But you are tying this back to the state school board and the assessments, standards that they come up with. I think in 2020 is when the social studies standards are due from the state school board.
Yes, they are.
And we are trying to update our statute to help them with the standards.
And I have been made aware of that, and that is why we have put so much time and effort into getting input, so those standards.
We're working on a timetable.
Yes, we are working on a timetable.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Senator Brosh.
Thank you.
Proponents?
Good afternoon, Senator Groney, members of the committee. My name is Matt Blomstedt. I'm the Commissioner of Education in the state of Nebraska. I better spell Blomstedt for you just in case. B-L-O-M-S-T-E-D-T. I am here. The state board actually met last week and discussed their support of various bills. And on this particular bill with LB 1069, the board voted to support it. I'm actually quite pleased that's in the position that we're at. The state board, as Senator Groney mentioned, is working quite diligently on the development of how we actually measure and prepare students for success in careers in college and civic life as well. And so it's really important that we do this particular work. I wanted to read this to you, a couple different little things. First of all, this is a quote from 1952 and my predecessor from back then. "It is the feeling of the Department of Public Instruction and of Nebraska educators generally that democracy is not merely a privilege to be enjoyed, it is a trust to keep and maintain. Citizenship education is based upon the conviction that there are extraordinary possibilities for self-government in ordinary people, all people, and progress has flourished in our country because Americans have been free to exercise their ingenuity, incentive, competition, and thrift. Education for more effective citizenship is more than ever before an opportunity and obligation of the public school. If ever a nation needed the intelligent and determined support of an appreciative and understanding younger generation, this country needs it now. Education for citizenship makes a people easy to lead but difficult to drive, easy to govern but impossible to enslave." I found that quite powerful to look through the history in the state of Nebraska and to understand the importance of this particular work and this particular conversation at any moment in time. I do thank Senator Groney for his testimony at the state board here recently as we talked about the preparation of kind of a civic readiness definition, and we've continued to work on that, but really, as Senator Groney mentioned, really waiting for any additional guidance that this bill might provide for us. Also wanted to thank Senator Christ as well for his work on this, and certainly Senator Brosh for introducing this particular bill. There are some concerns that the board had relative to how you go about the process of really doing assessment. I want to warn us just a little bit. We don't want a statewide assessment, and I think I heard in the testimony from Senator Brosh or the introduction from Senator Brosh and the exchange with Senator Groney, the importance of really looking at a way that would be appropriate to report this. But most important, I think, is reporting to parents always when you're talking about assessment. Perhaps second most important is reporting to that local administration and that local board. And so that's, I think, contained within this bill, or at least the concept is contained within the bill. Third most, and probably lastly, reporting somehow in an appropriate fashion to the state level. I would caution that we don't get into a situation where we're taking individual student results and trying to and bring those up for a couple different reasons. One, I think, as kind of was already alluded to, but I think second, because it's really terribly important that we can do this in an economical way, right? That the importance of reporting up to a state level individual student score suddenly has a very different type of meaning. State assessment's expensive for a lot of different reasons we could get into later. And I think some of those you already kind of heard, just knowing what things should be in it and other things they shouldn't. I was going to read one last little piece. This comes actually from the front page of our standards, last adopted, I believe, in 2012. It's actually a quote from President Reagan. "Since the founding of this nation, education and democracy have gone hand in hand. The founders believed a nation that governed itself like ours must rely upon an informed and engaged electorate. Their purpose was not only to teach all Americans how to read and write, but to instill the self-evident truths that are the anchors of our political system." I read both those things, the history at the department as well as a little bit of what's currently in our standards, just to give you a set of the context that the state board has actually talked about in this particular work. So with that, I'll end as the red light has appeared.
Question? Senator Manson Brooks.
Okay. Thank you for coming, Mr. Blomstedt. So you heard some of my questions and concerns. How do you see this going forward? Is this a class?
Actually, we would see, we looked at all of the different standards, and the types of expectations in that particular test could be assessed in a lot of different ways across a school. Generally, when you look at it, I think the bill said something about 8th and 11th grade, that you would have to have some type of summative experience with students, but I would not also recommend necessarily that the 100-question test would be the only way that you would accomplish that. I think all those 100 questions could be used, and we've identified them in our standards. I think it'd be appropriate to talk about grade level appropriateness with standards. I threw out there, for example, I think about a year ago, I went up to South Sioux City and watched a 5th grade class do something that was is at Lewis and Clark Elementary, is Mr. Cleve there, who's a great social studies teacher. But he had their students from all, by the way, all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of possibilities in their backgrounds, and they actually did assessment by having what they called the Great Americans Whack Wax Museum. They actually portrayed folks, and you went up to the student. You could tell those students were truly engaged. So we would want, in addition to summative tests, assessments that would really engage students in their learning. So they actually had that love of country. I think I heard earlier this notion of how you instill love of country, and instilling is not something that we can measure through an assessment, right? You can assess certain things about knowledge, but it's hard to know someone's heart. And so the reality is those types of things have been found unconstitutional, or at least as it was portrayed here, those are things that are hard to do just from a practical matter. So.
Okay, I think you know I have concerns about this specific test being used, and whether or not it's used nationally for immigrants, to me, makes little difference. So I'm concerned about the breadth of our history, and I've seen incredible work in Lincoln Public Schools in education of social studies and what our kids came home and learned. But I am concerned about the continued discussion of teaching to the test. And if this is our test that we're going to teach, it's not adequate. It's not sufficient, and I want to get it on the record. And do you think this speech is sufficient or adequate?
No, I don't
Sorry.
believe that the assessment itself should define all learning. Actually, our state standards that actually define the types of social studies probably also don't define all learning, right? The higher you get up in government, I'll just say, the kind of more generalized that we get about the type of assessment. So the larger the scale assessment, the harder it is to actually get those things accomplished. I think you'll hear, and maybe you'll hear today even, but definitely with students, when they're really engaged, it's not about the assessment per se, it's actually about the types of learning that they're able to do. If an assessment helps complement that, then it becomes valuable. I don't know if the language, and I forget in the specific language if it absolutely says it has to be I know it has to be included in the curriculum and content. The expectation around that assessment is something that I think we could continue to talk about, and how that would be implemented would be important to me as well.
Okay, I understand Senator Brosh isn't necessarily saying this test, but having it put into the record gives a lot of credence to this
Sometimes
test.
we look at record when we're trying to figure out what past legislators wanted to do, so
Exactly.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Groney. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here today.
Sure.
I just want to make sure I understand. So you're in favor or supportive of the legislation, but you're not supportive of statewide assessment that we do for English and math and science?
Well, in this particular case, not doing the exact same type of assessment, right? I think the concept here is that there would be some type of local assessment, some type of assessment that we could generally feel could be reported up. I think when you say aggregate results, the way I look at that, the number of students either, or some way to aggregate results, it's not about individual student, that we're not reporting that at an individual student level,
Right.
like we do with other state assessment, right?
We do, but we don't ever see the individual student. What's reported is the aggregate.
Not from the schools to the
No.
department, yeah.
To the schools, the
Right.
department. You know, every kid has a number, but I don't.
Right.
Nor can anybody else go look up a particular child. You protect them.
Yeah.
Federal law, you have to protect
Right.
them. So again, so how would we, and I don't have an opinion, I'm just trying to figure out what we're saying. How would we know that schools are actually doing this and what they're doing?
I think if we had a reporting requirement that looked like that all their students took it, right, that, hey, look, we number one know that, and the number that actually were successful in taking it. I think that type of reporting, I don't want to put words into what Senator Brosh has introduced, but that's how I would look at the language that's in there right now.
So for a high school student today in Nebraska, at an accredited high school, whatever, as long as it's accredited by your department, how much history and civics do they have to take to graduate from high school? What's the...
Well, see, it's an interesting, they have to offer civics, but graduation requirements are actually left up to local boards is around how much, what they actually have to take to graduate, if that's what you're asking.
So we don't, you could go to high school and graduate in Nebraska and not have any history or civics?
I think it's unlikely, because I think all the graduation requirements would do that, but we don't have it as a statewide requirement. It's not the same statewide
Not history or
requirement.
civics?
No, just that they're offered from a perspective of a school, right? They have to be offered.
But a kid could graduate without taking history or civics?
It's possible. I doubt it in any of our schools. I mean, I think they all require it from a graduation perspective.
Okay. I'd be interested in more kind of detailed on what those are. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Senator Kalowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, thank you for being here. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for your testimony today. I think it's important that we understand this test from a number of different perspectives. And one of them for me would be, I would like to see the students pass this test, no matter how many times they might have to take it, so there's at least a foundation of understanding at a 75 or 80% level or whatever else it might be. Other important aspects of looking at this, I believe, would be we've got a lot of disconnected facts that are hopefully interwoven into a fabric of a bigger picture by the teacher as they look at each of those 100 questions. They could be sufficiently placed in the picture of what the teacher wants to do with that class as far as the big picture of what they're all about as far as Americans or in American history or American government or whatever else it might be. And I think we get lost in the 100 questions because they're just factoids. But we have to aim toward that bigger picture. Would you agree of the message, of the story, of the glory of our country as it gets across in a bigger picture with that teacher?
Yeah, we would certainly hope that throughout the educational process that love of country is developed. It's hard to assess all of that. When you look at it from an assessment kind of perspective, they use something they call depth of knowledge. Most of the questions there are depth of knowledge 1, that it's meaning the lowest kind of depth of knowledge, like just reciting facts or something along those lines. We're also interested in a broader depth of knowledge, like how to participate in governmental functions, how to do that. I have always appreciated things like County Government Day, and I told the story of how when I went to County Government Day, I ended up as the county weed supervisor. I learned a lot around how government functions and works from that experience. I hope all of our students in the state of Nebraska are able to participate in such experiences that it give them even a deeper level of understanding of how our system really works.
The minimalist aspect of this 100-question test is, in my mind, is sort of like an 8th grade test that most students would be able to pass without much difficulty over time, you would hope. The rest just gets built on with the social studies classes that are required by every district in the state as they finish their requirements for their particular degree within that particular district. And I hope we can see it as building blocks and keep the vision always at the forefront of where we're going and what we want.
Yeah. And I will say, I think it's important, you mentioned 8th grade, and I think some of the language around how assessment would work, it'd be very, I think, advantageous that this language would describe something that would be that type of developmental assessment. I use driver's license as an example. So criterion reference assessment, we expect folks to be at a certain level of proficiency before we offer them a driver's license. I think in the setting here, it's like it'd be nice that by 8th grade, there's a pretty good sense of what students know and are able to do at 8th grade so they can actually build on that experience by the time they hit high school. I also am a real believer in motivation of students around their own data, right? That if we actually had something designed where students were able to somewhat assess themselves relative to their abilities online, other ways to do that, kids are motivated by getting better and better. And I think that's part of, this could be a unique opportunity, I think, in that light.
Thank you.
Couple questions. When you do assessments and they report to you on math and English, they do ethnic breakdown, male, female, because I read these studies where it's income levels. You don't interpret this language to force the department to do that. An aggregate score is an average to me. 50 students took it, their average score was 35. Somebody's thinking of moving into a district or enrolling in their school, they can go on your website, look at the standards, look at the test and say, do they teach social studies and history well? That's basically what I think the language asks for, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, and I want to make that clear too.
Yeah,
so if we have work to do in that language, but that would be, I think the intent would be that there be that type of aggregated score that would not be about individual students. That would take a very different type of assessment and a very different type of work that would be quite difficult to administer in that same way. This is basically asking schools to be able to report to us X number of students took the assessment, X passed, and if
I
there's a
don't think
score.
that
So,
the
yeah.
intent is for you to know it. It's
Yeah.
for somebody thinking to move into a community and can check out a school district on your website. That's the way I see this. 797601 says you shall do standards, shall cover the subject of reading, writing, math, mathematics, science, and social studies. Your 7-year rotation is coming up and when?
I think you're right on the date, although it might be 1 year off. It's either 19 or 20 or the year 1920. Sometimes when it's a fixed year, it's like, I don't know if it's the school year off the top of my head, so.
At the very last sentence of this says, the state board plan shall include a review of commonly accepted standards adopted by school district. And correct me if I'm wrong, we had a conversation one day, and you said this is the only standards that you can't enforce or look at because the present statute makes it a Class 3 misdemeanor, and it puts the sheriff in charge, not Matt Blomstedt. Is that correct?
Yeah, you and I did talk about that. So one of the realities of the Americanism statutes actually predates much of the kind of modern approach to how you handle state government and how you can go in that fact. If you looked at some of that language, it actually said it was a criminal offense for board members and administrators not to follow those laws. And so the way that we would have to enforce it from the Department of Education is to keep calling county attorneys. And that's not necessarily, I don't think, what would be appropriate, nor do I think I'd find a county attorney who thought that was appropriate either.
And
by
is
the way.
not
Yeah.
that the main reason why a lot of school boards and the state school board said, hands off, because we have a misdemeanor here, and it's a legal issue, not a policy issue.
Yeah, and we put, still within accreditation, the expectation that they're checking off and saying that they're doing those particular things, so that's how we check it. But if we found that they somehow were not, yeah, it seems odd that that's kind of the one element of education law that hangs there that's about being enforced by a county attorney.
So it's a good thing to remove that.
Yeah, I believe so.
Because the ACLU and others who make the claims is based on that you can, way I understand it, you can, free speech is, you can't arrest somebody for free speech, what they said. The school board can fire you, though. And I think that straightens that out. The other thing was the naturalization test, it's not limited to. Senator Pandenbrook, the way I read it, it says minimum, not limited to. So all of the rest could be there. And
I will add, just on that very point, this notion of that our ability to promulgate rules and regulations to interpret the law in order to carry out the law would be also quite important. So I want to make sure that the language that finally gets adopted in this would be consistent with an approach that we could carry that out, right? That we
not limited to, it could be what you...
Yeah, we could
the
be
state
able to
board does
describe
their
it,
duty.
yeah.
Does-
And the process, same on reporting, I would think. We would want to describe that as well as possible so there wasn't confusion with school districts.
And as far as memorizing the test, I think you memorize facts which apply to the test. Like
Yeah, and-
two senators.
And I would highlight that
Representatives, 2
around
years.
around assessments generally, and I think it was Senator Klosky that said students should actually be able to take this type of test until they're able to demonstrate that they've acquired the knowledge necessary to pass such a test, right? So those types of things I think would be important as well.
And wouldn't it give a guide to the instructor, the teacher too,
Yeah.
when she administers that test? And maybe her methods, she's not teaching them how many Supreme Court justices there are,
And that's
how many senators there are, what the name of your senator is. It could be used within their curriculum, could it not, as a quiz or anything, as long as they did it in 8th grade and reported
Yeah.
it to the parents?
I certainly believe it could be carried out that way, and the intention of adding language, and I appreciate again Senator Brosh for including this, the formative and interim and summative assessment portion. So a formative test is like a quiz. Are you being assessed on something in the classroom, so a teacher can go ahead and reteach material that's not necessarily been understood. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner.